Hi, and welcome to this Spheros webinar about California Assembly Bill 2851 and other new laws seeking to implement fenceline monitoring at metals recycling facilities throughout the state. The timeframe for these regulations is quickly approaching, so now is the best time to determine if these laws will apply to your facility and start preparing for data collection. At Spheros Environmental, our air measurements department has extensive research in the type of data collection, management, and compliance that can support your business as you navigate these new regulations. Next slide. My name is Josette Marrero, and I'm a senior air quality scientist and project manager who's been working in the area of industrial fenceline monitoring for the past 8 years. That includes all steps of the process from monitoring plan development to equipment selection and installation, and then operations and maintenance. I'll be your point of contact in Southern California and the San Joaquin Valley.
And my name is Ryan Moffet. I'm a senior air quality scientist based out of Northern California. I lead our air measurement scientific expertise and support group. My background's in fenceline monitoring, custom ambient monitoring, and particulate matter research. I'll be your point of contact for Northern California.
California AB 2851 became law in 2024. It was born out of an investigation by DTSC, or the Department of Toxic Substances Control, into releases of light fibrous material from a metal shredding facility into the neighboring community in Oakland. 2851 requires metal shredding facilities to conduct air quality monitoring at their boundaries or fence lines. A metal shredding facility is defined as any operation that uses a shredder or a hammer mill, as it's sometimes called, to process vehicles, appliances, or scrap metal. And you can see pictures of both of those to the right. In total, there are 10 facilities in the state which fall under this definition. They are located throughout the state in the LA Basin, the Central Valley, and the Bay Area. The specifics of how this law is going to be implemented for those facilities depends on decisions that are made at the air district level. All of the facilities, all 10 of them, fall within the jurisdiction of one of the 3 air districts that I'll talk about shortly. But first, I wanted to highlight the timeline of these new regulations. So local air districts must develop their own monitoring rules to meet these requirements by January 1st, 2027. And those regulations need to be adopted by July 1st, 2027. So we're just months away. As I previously mentioned, there are 3 air districts that will set the rules for the facilities that fall under their jurisdiction, and they're each at varying stages in the rule development process. So in South Coast, the Air Quality Management District, or AQMD, will be looking to revise an existing rule number 1460, which previously set housekeeping and best management practices for metal shredders, but nothing about air quality monitoring. So as it stands, they're in the information gathering and analysis step of their amendment process, and so far they've had 2 working group meetings, but they've yet to decide what the final requirements are going to be. So the next steps might involve another working group meeting, or they'll go ahead and release preliminary rule language and a staff report that'll be followed by a public workshop to get feedback, and that's all before they finalize the rule before January 1st. Similarly, in the Bay Area, the AQMD there will be looking to amend Regulation 6, Rule 4, which currently does require facilities to develop a plan to reduce their fugitive emissions. But the amended rule is instead going to work to establish best management practices and air monitoring requirements to create consistency amongst all those facilities. As with South Coast, the specifics for how to incorporate 2851 requirements are still to come, and they'll also have to undergo a public comment period before they're finalized at the end of the year. And lastly, in the Central Valley, the San Joaquin Valley Air Pollution Control District, or APCD, does not currently have any existing regulations regarding metal shredding facilities. So they'll be looking to create a new regulation that incorporates the requirements of AB 2851. That draft rule language is also expected by the end of the year. Overall, these regulations are going to need to incorporate several elements that are specifically highlighted in 2851. These include which metals or other species are required to be measured and quantified, Currently, the 2851 text mentions lead, zinc, cadmium, and nickel, all of which are known to be toxic to human health. The air district rules will also set the frequency with which metals need to be monitored. So there are continuous methods which can provide concentrations on a near real-time basis, or there are sampling methods which happen less frequently. Ryan here will discuss the differences in a bit more detail shortly. Lastly, the rules will need to determine at which observed concentrations the public should be notified, so they understand the potential health impacts of facility emissions. For that, the districts are working with DTSC and health officials from the Office of the Environmental Health Hazard Assessment, or OEHA. And they'll also determine if there will be any enforcement for exceedances above those thresholds.
Thanks, Josette. Spheros has extensive experience in fence line monitoring, and I'm here to talk about the components of the fence line systems and the available monitoring technologies. We've implemented fence line systems throughout California in all 3 air districts that are relevant to AB 2851. I've listed out here the major components needed for fence line monitoring. First off, we've got the monitoring systems. These are the core components of the fence line program that actually perform or make the measurements. These are the instruments, the shelters, the infrastructure. I'll detail more about the available technologies in the next slide, but for now, it will suffice to say that these are important considerations for compliance, and they'll need to be approved by the air districts. The physical installation will need to be specified also by the air districts, and this is the key thing, which is related to the spatial coverage for which the measurements will be made. And this will drive the number of analyzers and the number of monitoring sites that will be needed. Data management is critical for maintaining compliance over the lifetime of the program. And at Spheros, we've developed our Insight data management system to allow for dashboards for routine data quality assurance and download, chain of custody to track any changes in the data or QC flags, APIs for data access, and also our Insight DMS serves as the backend for our public websites. A robust QA or quality assurance program should be detailed in guiding documents such as the monitoring plans and the quality assurance project plans. In these documents, all aspects of the project and the QA processes are documented. These are living documents that are revised continuously throughout the lifetime of the project to take into account the ongoing changes at the site and in the regulations. Reporting is a key activity that's related to the fence line monitoring systems. Reporting frequency and report content is typically spelled out by the air district and can also serve the needs of the facility to ensure smooth operations of the fence line system. At Spheros, our reporting is integrated into our internal QA processes to ensure that the reports are of the highest quality. Each report is typically produced and reviewed by experienced analysts, technical expert project managers, senior quality assurance officers, and our technical editing group. The fence line reports typically present results of the fence line systems, and they compare them to the health thresholds that are set. Air districts will develop specific notification procedures. The notification thresholds, as Josette mentioned, are typically related to health, and the health thresholds are set by, for example, the Office of Environmental Health Hazard Assessment, or OEHA, or other agencies. Our digital services group uses the real-time data arriving in our Insight data system to deliver timely notifications to the public and other stakeholders via email and text messages. Notifications can also be made based off of offline data if necessary. Depending on the requirements of the air district rules, public websites may be required. Spheros has robust experience developing public websites for fence line monitoring and other air quality monitoring programs. Spheros operates well over 10 websites that publish quality control data in real time. And in this slide, I show an example off to the lower right-hand corner from a previous project. Typically, the website will have a map showing where the sites are. We'll overlay some meteorological data. You can see the blue circle with the arrow pointing in the direction that the wind is blowing. Off to the right of the website panel, you can see the real-time data along with background information that gives the public added context for the measurements. So even if the measurements are not made in real time, public websites are also a good utility for the archival of the results of the fenceline monitoring program. For example, the EPA runs a really similar type of website for the refinery sector rule, or RSR. That's a good example of how offline measurements can be displayed to the public. All right, so now for the monitoring technologies, which I consider to be probably the most interesting part of these programs. There are two ways that you can sample and measure the concentrations of metal particulate matter in the air. So the first way is by offline filter sampling, and the other one is by real-time measurements using an automated filter tape feed. Either way, the metal-bearing particles need to be deposited on the filter and then subsequently analyzed by X-rays using the technique of X-ray fluorescence. So in the pictures on the right, you can see some small boxes that contain, or the small gray box that contains the offline filter sampler, and then the larger white box that almost looks like a refrigerator behind it that contains the real-time X-ray fluorescence instrument. Protruding out the top of the boxes, you can see these specialized sampling inlets that allow for particles below a certain size to be sampled and then subsequently sampled on the filter. Offline filter sampling is typically done over a 24-hour period. During that time, air is drawn through that inlet and collected on the filter. Those filters are then collected and sent off to the lab and analyzed for their mass and percent metallic composition using X-ray fluorescence. Sampling is typically done on a set schedule, for example, 1 out every 6 day schedule that's documented by the EPA, for example. You could also take individual samples where you would have a technician going out and collecting and sending to the lab each time. Or you can have what's known as sequential sampling done, where you can collect a large number of individual filter samples automatically, and then that reduces the number of site visits that are needed. Sequential samplers tend to be larger, whereas the individual filter samplers are smaller and can even be run on batteries in some cases. Due to the relative simplicity of the offline filter sampling, the operating cost is generally lower than it is for the real-time monitoring. However, the labor costs may be increased depending on how many site visits are required. For the real-time monitoring, the principle of X-ray fluorescence is still used, but here the sample is collected more frequently and automatically on a filter tape. The minimum detection limit depends on how long you collect for. If you're collecting from anywhere from about a half hour to an hour, your detection limit should be below most health thresholds for the species that are relevant for AB 2851. One thing to note is that the higher cost of the real-time monitor is largely driven by the initial capital cost, the maintenance, the data management, and site infrastructure. So the infrastructure that should be considered is power, whether or not you would need some sort of cement slab to site the larger, enclosure, and any permitting activities that are related to that infrastructure. The advantage of real-time monitoring is that the data is much more rich, which allows for a more highly time-resolved delineation of the source for the individual metal species. So in summary, the monitoring rules are required to be developed by the air districts by January 1st, 2027, and then implemented on July 1st, 2027. They covered lead, zinc, cadmium, and nickel. The rule requirements will drive the approach and the cost, whether it be online or offline, how many sites are required, whether or not public websites are required. I did want to touch on the utility of pilot studies. So if there's any concern that the concentrations of the metals might be over the proposed threshold values, a pilot study might be a good way to get an early answer on whether or not any mitigations are needed prior to having the rule come out and the monitoring take place under the rule. Spheros has performed pilot studies at a number of facilities in the refinery space, and we can envision similar studies being of utility in the metals monitoring space as well. So with that, we would encourage you to reach out to us with any questions. Josette Marrero at spherosenv.com or Ryan Moffet at spherosenv.com. We thank you, and we hope you found this information useful.